Good morning. It is Monday, December 8th, 2025, back here for another daily shakeup. Today, I want to talk about getting lucky, happenstance, and a little story about that, but more importantly, show you the reality that we can create our own happenstance opportunities. We can create our own luck because it's not really luck. It's about priming the pump for luck, priming the soil for happenstance. So here's the quick story. A client of mine goes to a convention, a very large convention, which may or may not be relevant, but I think it's significant because it had like 5,000 people, national conference. She's working a booth, and a gentleman comes up. She starts chatting with him. And before too long, he looks at her name tag, which has her name, her company name, and the town she lives in, which is Columbus, Ohio. And he says, "Oh, you're from Columbus." And she says something like, "Well, do you know Columbus?" And he said, "Actually, I grew up in a little town outside of Columbus." He said, "I grew up in Marion, Ohio, which is a small town." And she said, "Well, that's interesting. I grew up in Marion, Ohio. Where'd you go to high school to?" And go to high school. And he said, "Well, I went to Marion, I think Harding was the name of the high school." And she pauses and said, "Boy, I went to that same high school. When did you graduate?" And he proceeds to tell her, and she realizes that and says to him, "I was a senior when you were a freshman at that high school. I apologize for not remembering you, but frankly, seniors and freshmen don't always know each other." And then she realizes because of that connection, she looks at his last name and realizes it's familiar and says, "Were your parents teachers?" I said, "Well, absolutely they were." And she goes on to say that she knows his parents, and she subsequently has found out through talking to her mother that she also knows this gentleman's aunt who has a different last name. So they went from having this conversation of strangers to two people who not only grew up in the same town, but went to high school together. Now, that doesn't mean there's going to be any business, but it changes the conversation. It shortens the journey to trust. It doesn't mean you're going to trust that person completely, but it's movement. And typically, that movement requires a lot of conversations and connection points. They found that in the first moment. And so I said to her, "How fun was that?" She said, "It was really fun. And it was, lucky. I got lucky." And I said, "Well, what can you learn from this?" And she said, "Well, I don't know because the fact is he asked about Columbus because it was on my name tag. If that hadn't been there, maybe we don't have that conversation." And I said, "Well, what did his name tag say?" And she said, "Well, it said Washington, D.C." And she said, "I don't have a connection to Washington, D.C." And I said, "Well, what if you had asked him, 'I see you're from Washington, D.C. Are you from there?'" In which case he would have said, "No, I'm from Columbus, a little town outside of Columbus, Ohio." And they would have got to the same point. Now, there's no way to guarantee, and that's the nature of relationship buildings and connection conversations. There's no way to guarantee that we're going to get to some sort of connection like that. But I can guarantee you will not get to those connection points if you have the typical conversations. Like, what do you do? Or you limit yourself to the information of where he is now. One of the greatest questions you can ask someone is simply, "Where are you from? Where are you from?" Because in asking them that question, typically they will start to tell you part of their life story. Now, you're not going to typically ask someone that you just met, "Tell me your life story." That would be a bit much. But when you ask them where they're from and maybe follow it up with, "If you have a connection to that place, talk about it. If you don't, what was it like to grow up with there, like there? How did you end up growing up there?" It doesn't make sense to ask people for their life story, but when you ask them some simple questions such as "Where are you from?" with genuine curiosity and interest, people will tell you big chunks of their life story. And that's how we build relationships, accelerate relationships, enhance connection, and start to build and nurture and again accelerate that type of connection that allows us to move forward in our relationships to each other's mutual benefit? Is it luck? Is it happenstance? Or is it planting seeds through curiosity, genuine interest, and questions? That's my thought for today. Love to hear your thoughts on my thoughts. Love to have a like, a comment, even better, share it with your community, and let's spread this conversation to enhance our leadership and our relationships.